Hello, this is a special presentation of Freethought Forum by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I am Joe Barnhart.
And I am Mary Ann Barnhart, and we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you are not alone. In East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and people curious about living a life free of supernatural beliefs.
And it's a call-in show, but we have only one phone line, so if you can't get in immediately, well, keep trying or try email at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. Now let's move over to our show sponsors. The Atheist Society of Knoxville, for one. It's a meeting place and at Barley's for a happy hour tonight, and for food and conversation. Friday we meet at Barley's, rather at Bearden Garden, and there's a copy, The God Delusion, of the book on the table there that'll guide you where to go, and being able to discuss free thought, atheism, agnosticism, open discussion. They ask you not to proselytize, but you can come in and argue. And the monthly activities are what?
The monthly activities of the Rationalists of East Tennessee are on the first and third Sunday mornings, usually lectures and lively roundtable discussions. The second Sunday is book club. June's book is Man-Made God by Barbara Walker. Ms. Walker is also the author of The Woman's Encyclopedia of Myth and Secrets, and is a frequent contributor to Freethought Today, the newsletter of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. The fourth Sunday of the month is the Reflections Gathering, a potluck afternoon meeting at a member's home.
So visit our websites for the additional monthly programs and the details, and as well as the book club times and locations. And then what about this afternoon, Mary Ann?
Well, this afternoon we hope we will have viewers calling in with questions. And today we are going to speak about coming of age and providing naturalistic explanations and examples.
Okay. So the topic is growing up, coming of age, or what does it mean to become a responsible person? And before that, I want to mention something that I think you'll find quite interesting. There's a camp quest for children, young people, and also, I'll get to that in a minute. Don't forget, Venus is in transition starting after the show, and you can drop into the Atheist Society of Knoxville to meet up at Barley's and maybe watch at least on some video feed. But it's a spectacular event. If you live to be 115 or so, you can see it again. And now, what I want to talk to you about briefly before we move on is about Camp Quest in the Smoky Mountains. The summer camp for children, for humanists, and parents of an agnostic or atheistic background can have their children come there and learn from a different perspective and speak openly and freely without being proselytized. And that's from ages about 8 to 17. And it's in the Smoky Mountains and sponsored by the Rationalists of East Tennessee also. And you can find that on the website, Smoky Mountains Camp Quest, SmokyMountainsCampQuest.org, and also the RET website can give you information about that too. Now, what's next, Mary Ann?
The topic on growing up, and we'll be providing naturalistic rather than supernaturalistic explanations and examples. How about you define natural versus supernatural?
Well, I'll tell you what, this is a big topic. What is supernatural and what's naturalism? Benefits for the various sides. That's a whole hour just to start on that. So we won't jump into that now, because it'll take the whole time, and we have another program to deal with, and we promised to deal with. And let's start off right away on the growing up process. And let me say this. If you are a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian or an agnostic or an atheist or a Hindu, much of what we have to say, we hope you will find meaningful. And maybe would agree with at least 80% of it. But we would welcome call-in because we learn from each other. And nobody knows all the answers, especially about raising children. Nobody's got all the answers. So let's explore, what does it mean to become a responsible person? Let me suggest the key word here is response. Being able to respond to the cues that keep a society going. What keeps a society safe, free, and secure, and what keeps children feeling wanted and cared for. As parents and as neighbors and friends and relatives, they're cues that we pick up. And part of the job of raising children is to teach them to pick up the cues and the responsibilities also.
If a mother is breastfeeding her infant, she experiences several cues, some originating inside her body and other cues originating outside. For example, the baby's cry or restless movements, the clock on the wall telling her that it's time for the little one to eat. Fathers, aunts, uncles, cousins, older siblings, and others can become sensitive to these cues, thus assisting the mother.
Yeah, these other persons. There's a book called Mother Nature, and another book called Mothers and Others, written by a mother and a scientist, and she refers to alloparents, that is, parents who aren't the parents, but who assist the parents in raising the children, because it does take a team and a village to raise children. And so it's crucial for kids to know they are accepted and wanted and loved, and that feeling abides throughout their childhood and into their youth. That's absolutely crucial, and it takes more than parents to do this. By the way, the great apes, the mothers don't turn loose of their children. I mean, they're fierce about that. Whereas human beings recognize the importance of these children responding to others. And that has many advantages. That one of the major advantages is that the human child in particular, begins to learn what it's like to think about the feelings and the thinking of other people. And that's an enormous advantage over the apes and the monkeys.
Among human beings, the key word is balance, the happy medium for nurturing the child's physical and mental health lies between two damaging extremes. The first extreme would be the mother's total abandonment of the child, and the other extreme may be labeled as smother love.
Smother love.
That's the mother's excessive possessiveness and compulsive need to be the sole influence in her baby's life. I have encountered a few women who actually say they want to be that total influence. They don't want someone else telling their children what to do.
No, but most parents know better than that. They know they need help. In fact, even with the nipples, the rubber nipples, that's help in many cases. It may create indigestion, but even that, the baby learns that flows faster sometimes than the mother's milk. But what's really important is that embrace from the mother and the father and others is to get them to feel the warmth and the security. By the way, I should mention, you and I were reading about orangutan, one of the primates, nurses her child from 4 to 7 years, not months. Years. And finally, the baby gets weaned.
breaks away.
But she doesn't have a lot of help.
Caregiving can be tiring and not always pleasant. Changing diapers, washing them, and attending to what Shakespeare referred to as the mewling and puking, the baby's whimpering and whining. Sometimes babies cry and scream when deprived of attention. So it definitely takes a team to raise children. High quality care from people, in addition to the mother, is essential to maximum nurturing.
Yeah. And the reason that's important to other people is social intelligence. That's what human beings are superior in, is social intelligence. And even before the child is beginning to try to understand what's in another person's head. Now, it's all the presuppositions there, or the predispositions are there, and he has to learn language, but he or she is already moving in that social direction.
Are you saying we are predisposed to enact the golden rule?
We are biologically presupposed to do that, I think, and trying to find out what others are thinking and feeling, because that's the basis of the golden rule. Without that, the golden rule just simply wouldn't be possible. Chimps, for example, can be exceedingly aggressive toward each other and don't seem to have any guilt feelings about dominance. Whereas human beings, there are people who try to be dominant, but we have more controls of that. And that people can feel more guilt and shame in attempting to do that.
Well, humans can develop a sustaining and informed conscience thanks to the expansion of our neocortex and our ability to bond with several others when we are babies and children. We can not only mimic the expressions and behavior of others, we can also experience empathy. We can feel with others. The baby can see others like himself or herself.
Yeah.
Later, if we have time, we can talk about the emergence and development of conscience. But we could talk now more about empathy. More than sympathy, it includes taking the other person's role, putting yourself in another's shoes emotionally. That perhaps starts with or before the child begins to learn a complex language. After all, language is by definition shared with others. We humans learn to put ourselves imaginatively into the heads of others in the sense of sharing their ideas and concepts. In some respects, chimps cannot disagree with each other in any sophisticated sense, right?
Yeah, they can disagree in an unsophisticated sense. And they can certainly be disagreeable, and in that sense we are like them. But we can also disagree intelligently. But what that means, as any married person knows that's been successful in marriage, is you have to understand the other person, what he's saying and she is saying, understanding what that other person is feeling, and that's hard work.
Well, the crucial point is, if the human baby is fortunate, he or she will have early interaction with adult human beings who portray the kinds of feelings that we hope the baby will develop. And by becoming curious about those others, the little one is actually learning to develop his or her self-image while simultaneously experiencing empathy. By making connections with others very early, the baby is at the very same time learning to make connections with herself or himself.
So connecting with others is at the same time like a mirror connecting with yourself. And the more you learn about others, the more you have the possibility.
Self-reflection.
The mirror neurons then. Well, then by the age they're 2, well, 2 is a major, at the age of 2, wouldn't you think, Marion, is a big leap in being a human being. I mean, that takes us way beyond other animals, because descriptive statements. Now imagine a 2-year-old can describe something and ask a question. You don't do this with dogs. I mean, you love dogs, and you can relate, and they can have empathy. But just to make one clear, descriptive sentence is an amazing leap. And of course, by the time they're 5 years of age, they're making puns with the language. So the words and language and thinking for human beings grow and develop together.
Well, in that book, Mothers and Others, anthropologist Sarah Hardy notes that humans have brains specially adapted for sympathetic interaction and forging of relationships. She believes that the research shows that human children are less self-centered than chimpanzees, and human children are more spontaneously cooperative and more strongly inclined to share. But why is that the case? And doesn't her claim seem to conflict with what parents observe about babies when total strangers come on the scene? Don't infants react with anxiety, if not fear, when a total stranger approaches?
So it is ironic. I mean, I think you're right. It does seem to be contradictory. But let's see if we can straighten this out. At the age of 2, the child has developed one word that's so important to the child, and that's the word no. And some people think, well, that's when they develop selfishness. We're going to try to develop another frame for seeing this. Some people even say kids are born innately selfish. But I think there's another way of looking at this. But no is important to a 2-year-old. And they are leery of strangers until they can see someone they have relate to the stranger, and then that breaks the ice, as it were. And that has some advantages, because in the ape world, there are some apes which strangers will kill an infant. I mean, there seems to be a kind of envy or almost aggression. It's hard for me to figure out why, but that is a fact. But what we're suggesting, I think, Marianne, is our kind of species, the human species, needs a variety of caretakers. We are so complex that a variety of caretakers, aunts, cousins, uncles, neighbors, school teachers, all and adoptive relatives, all of these are crucial. So that brings us, what, to empathy, or what?
We acquire by learning to look at and experience the world from the perspective of someone else. To have genuine empathy with someone else, children must imagine what it's like to be someone else altogether. But this comes about when they have very early opportunities to interact with older and more experienced caretakers or relatives who express an interest in the child's feelings and mental states. So when we see the child after coming from the mother's womb and has entered what we might call the social womb, there is a kind of nurturing and feeding that takes place that must continue.
Okay.
The brain is growing very rapidly, and by 1 year, she's becoming an explorer.
Oh, yeah, an explorer. Imagine having to discover you can't walk through walls. You don't innately know this. You have to learn this. And that's why adults are so important to kids, because they wouldn't make it without adult guidance. And older kids can be very crucial in helping the kid come of age.
And know what to taste further than just right there.
That's why having kids not with mean kids, they grow older kids, is very, very important. Okay.
Well, we've seen children do role play in games. I've watched our children and then our grandchildren with dolls or whatever, toys, and go through all kinds of experiences with these imaginary characters. And I think children are very...
Yeah, that's imagination. Would you say this? When a kid is pretending to be, through a doll or through or just through imagination, another person, That's an amazing leap. To be another person means you got to think now, what does another person do and what are the responsibilities and the roles that this other person takes? And kids start doing this early. I think this, you could make a case, this may be how conscience and morality begins, is that as they begin to see from another perspective, then they can say, well, they're not the whole universe. In fact, to discover other people is in many ways to discover who they are. Would you think?
Oh yes, and I have experienced my granddaughter bringing in her doll in a carriage and telling me what to do to take care of her.
Yeah. Yeah, my granddaughter the other day our granddaughter was telling me I need to speak my words more clearly. It sounded very much like what I was telling her to do. Okay, let's see. Beginning at the age of 4, children seem to imagine somewhat what it's like to be another person. That takes a lot of time. And the reason it takes time is it's so much for the human child to learn. You learn not about trees only, and walls, and rocks in the river. You can't jump headlong into the river if there are rocks. You have to learn about all of that, but you also have to learn how other people think. And that takes an enormous amount of time.
And they can certainly read your expressions and get to your thinking before you even say it sometimes.
Now, there's a study in Israel. Do you remember anything about that study that they interact with multiple caretakers? And that increased their confidence. That was what's surprising to me, is that it provided those caretakers were nurturing and dependable. Now, the key word is dependable. So kids can count on them. And that increased their confidence because that meant they can relate to this person and they can relate to this one and this one. And then they go back. See, they got multiple disciplines. Well, unfortunately, there are hazards for children. In the primate world, children can be very much at risk, and that's partly why the ape mother clings to that child, because the young children are in such danger, not only from the natural world, but other primates or other animals too.
Well, and there are places in the world right now where children are in a lot of danger.
Oh yeah, and of course in Hitler's time they had genocide for one whole group of children and people and their parents too. Well, we'd like to ask our audience who are also, many of them, raising children or are assisting others in raising children, maybe call in and share with us some of your insights. And the phone number is on the screen. We'd be very happy to hear from you. Well, is there any kind of neurological research going on in this area, Mary Ann?
Well, actually, neurological research recently is helping understand why the Apostle Paul, in chapter 9 of the Epistle to the Romans, was correct to write explicitly that the child in the womb can do nothing moral or immoral. The little fetus simply has no brain sufficient to allow it to entertain concepts of right and wrong. Knowing that Presbyterians developed partly out of Calvinism, we might ask a Presbyterian minister, what was John Calvin's view of the baby in the womb?
Okay, well, let's have a program break, but we're going to ask, what was John Calvin's view of the baby in growing up? Let's see now, if we can unravel our notes here. We want to have a program break. And we talked about, maybe we can get to the break later, but we did talk about, do you have some notes over there about, this is something about Einstein was coming up, and I lost the track information on that somewhere. Yeah, let's see. I don't want to, yeah, Moonwalk with Einstein. Did you mention that on November the 11th as one of the book club titles?
No, that wasn't on my list.
Yeah, that's, and the Jefferson Bible on September the 9th. There are a number of titles coming up. They're crucial. Influence of money in politics. So we're at the mid-program break now. And if you're tuning in, this is the Freethought Forum by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. And it's funded by jointly by these two contributors. And I hope you will feel free not only to visit, but also to participate by email and by phone. Shows are live, this kind of show, almost every Tuesday from 5 to 6, or every Tuesday, except for some in-break now and then. And it's on our community television. And the feedback is freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. Okay, now. Lively presentations we talked about, so let's move back to our program and then we'll get to some more of our announcements, Marianne.
Well, in Calvin's theology, was he referring to individuals among the adult population?
Well, let me back up a little bit. At the time of the Reformation, now this seems strange. At the time of the Reformation, that's the 16th century, John Calvin rejected the notion of limbo of the Catholic tradition, rejected it. But he came up with the notion that had already been developed earlier in the Middle Ages, but he intensified it, predestination, that God had determined in advance which individuals would be eternally damned and which would be eternally saved. That's before he created the world. He determined that. That's called it predetermining. And so your question is he referring there just to the adult population? And the answer is no, he was referring even to children.
But Zwingli disagreed.
Now Zwingli was over there in Switzerland, and he did disagree. He radically. He thought baptism for kids, for example, was unnecessary. If baptism is a means of salvation, and he thought this was just nonsense. He thought all kids who die are going to heaven. They're not going to be. But Calvin thought unless they were elect, they would go to hell.
What does the Westminster Confession teach? Well,
that was a big problem. So the Westminster Confession came out of the Calvinistic tradition. And that was a big problem. If you're a parent and you're giving birth to children, you say, well, the Lord God Almighty has already determined some of them going to hell and some to heaven. You've got a big problem with this. So here's what they came up with, is that about 1903, they came up with a new view. This was in the United States. We believe that all those dying in infancy are included in the election of grace. In other words, if you have died as an infant, then you don't go to hell. God's not going to elect you to go to hell. Now that was a major change in their view of God. And of course, you can, as I said last week on this program, you can see major changes going on in Christian theology as well as Jewish theology, and this is one example. The Roman Catholic tradition, it's been all over the map on this question of limbo and the status of children. And the Catholic Church in 1992 had a catechism, and the word limbo is not even mentioned. It's not even there. Now, although in the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas, who is the star of Catholic theology still, seemed to teach that the new conception in the womb was at enmity with God. That is, an enemy of God because of what they called original.
Meaning that original sin and hostility toward God came instantly upon conception?
Yeah, that's their view. According to Thomas Aquinas and many of his contemporaries in that field, original sin arrives apparently as soon as the sperm and the egg come together. Original sin comes in with it, and it goes into the zygote and into the fetus, and of course then in every stage it's cursed with original sin.
Did you read of a priest who wanted the doctors to insert a tube inside a woman into her womb so that as priest he could send the baptismal water to the fetus before it died?
Yeah, I remember reading about that. Well, because of the thought that the fetus or the embryo would not go to heaven. Just wouldn't make it unless it had baptismal waters apparently on its head. Now there is something you asked me about, training up a child. You remember what you asked? From what passage is that in the book of Proverbs?
Mm-hmm. Train up a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it.
Oh yeah, train up a child. Now, that seems to me the primary, and that the child at birth does not know right from wrong, which would fit with the Apostle Paul's notion that it didn't know right from wrong, and it doesn't, and it certainly fits with what we know about neuroscience, is that the brain simply isn't sufficiently developed to have a conscience yet. So a lot of moral training must take place after birth, most of it. So
well, now that we look at the human child walking upright, who can deny their fondness of the world? No, along with it comes with their self-identity. It takes a lot of brain work to learn a language and to develop simultaneously a degree of self-recognition.
Oh, yeah.
So the child has a right to assert herself and say, take notice of me.
Yeah.
I have a right.
Yeah, so that no, that often is thought to be just 2-year-old selfishness. You could say, what do you think, Marian? It's saying, look, I'm here. You've got to take notice of me. You don't take me for granted. I'm a person. She's arrived in the kingdom of personhood. And so, do you think? Well, you can't rush a child, can you? In conscience, in developing a conscience.
Yes, they have a lot more to weave together into a whole than does a Cocker Spaniel or some other animal. Humans need much more time to develop within their supportive community.
Yeah, most children would exemplify unmistakable compassion, I think you could say, with astonishing scope by the time they're 10. And when you think about it, even at the age of 10, they are beyond most Cocker Spaniels, even in adulthood. So eventually exemplifying this comes because they have 2 wombs, would you say? The womb of the mother, and that's then leading them to the second womb, which is more time and years nurturing the development of, and that I think is what we mean by coming of age. It just simply takes 2 wombs, as it were, to bring a child to the level of language, consciousness, and conscience. They're not born, most kids are not born with a conscience. They have the potential for, it's like, in many ways, what you think, Marion, it's like a language. A kid is born with a possibility of learning a particular language if he's in the community and is taught over the months and years. And conscience is the same way, it seems to me.
Yes, and if he is learning to adapt to a younger sibling and understand the needs of someone else that he has a part in resolving, that's another way to develop a conscience.
Yeah, it's another mirror to reflect. Okay, so let's put it this way. Let's suppose a kid starts, see what you think. The child starts with self-interest and then learns that his own self-interest is shallow and won't develop until he makes connections with the interests of other people. So you develop mutual interests so that the original self of a child is growing. It's self-interest, all right, but it's not it's a social self. So it's not the same self anymore. So in that respect, would you say that, well, would you say all children are born again in a naturalistic sense of the word? I want to emphasize being born again not as a supernatural phenomenon, but as a natural social phenomenon. And you can watch a child, you can literally observe being born and then as just an infant, and gradually being born as a social being, taking in the interest and the perspective of other people so that they literally are not the same person. They are new persons over months and years. In that sense, everybody in every culture around the world is born again as a naturalistic phenomenon rather than a supernaturalistic.
It's the I and thou.
I and thou, yeah. And for a kid to learn there are other, well, a kid, I remember our son, when he was just a toddler, taking a stick, as all kids do at that age, going along and hitting the hearth and the brick. And then I was standing there saying, well, am I going to be next? And gradually I was, you see. And then what was interesting is in months he realized bricks and persons are not the same. and that's different. I mean, it's a you could say that's a naturalistic conversion. He is converted from this self-centered child, and he has to be at that age. But then he takes in the viewpoints and the feelings and the thoughts and perspectives of others, and so he is literally new. He's what would you say? He's gone beyond himself, would you say?
Hmm.
So, would you call this the little one a scientist, the little toddler a scientist in heart?
Very much so. Experimenting, searching, trying, trial and error.
Trial and error, yeah.
I remember watching our son trying to get up these little short steps from the patio to another part of the porch, and it took him several days to learn how exactly he could.
Yeah, mothers are familiar with how long this takes. So this is a new creation to move from an infant to, say, to a 2-year-old to a 4-year-old, in many ways is a new creation. And that is why we want to emphasize what I think our audience already knows, the importance of those other people other than the parents, along, of course, with the mother and the father. But this work of transforming this infant into the social world to be responsible to respond to all those cues that he's not born with. He's just born with the capacity to learn those, and that takes a long time. Imagine a language. A chimpanzee simply doesn't have anything comparable to it. They can read signs, but they can't manipulate those symbols that we call language, which is enormously complex. I mean, even language becomes a tool.
That's why we don't invite them to be in discussions.
They don't join us in our conversations.
The language accomplishments of even a 5-year-old human manifest a skill infinitely beyond the chimp's language capacity or primitive repertoire. Because of the highly developed brain, humans are capable of abstract reasoning, language, introspection, and a vast scope of problem solving. Combined with an erect body carriage that frees the hands for manipulating objects, our mental capability allows us to surpass all other living species around the globe in using tools and inventing new tools. And I just saw yesterday some boys, I believe in the 5th grade, who were showing their invention. They've worked on it for weeks, and they have invented a way to dispense a liquid without all of it coming all at once. But they have a slow drip process.
Other animals have some tools, but nothing is complex and is developed. And inventing and then multiplying tools, I mean, it's just astonishing. And that's what comes of the human brain and language.
And that's then the definition of a person.
Well, you mentioned earlier, we might touch on conscience, we just have a little bit of time. But would you say that language itself is a kind of moral commitment? Just to have a language means I have to keep my promise to you. When I use my language, I have to keep the same meanings, and you keep the same meanings. And then I have to not lie. I mean, that's language presupposes, if you're going to have a language with communication, you already have built in a rule. Moses, in other words, did not come up with this. People had that long before Moses. Long before Moses. They knew what lying was because you cannot communicate. You can't even solve elementary problems without having the truth-telling that's implied in just elementary language and sharing of information.
Well, I quickly lost track of the number of times our own young children asked, why? Then the question seemed to grow increasingly complex. I can remember my child, I don't remember the age, Grammy, who made the world?
Yeah, that's a and I remember a kid in our neighborhood saying, who made God? If you say God, well, who made God, you see? And it's a sensible question.
And then I encountered, my mother has kept this story alive. I had a playmate in the neighborhood who asked me, well, Marianne, if there's a God, why did he let the bee sting me?
And that raises the whole problem of suffering and evil. And there's one book in the Bible in particular that wrestles heroically with it, in my opinion. Doesn't solve it, but it phases it. And that's the book of Job. And here's Job doing quite well in the world, and he loses his children and his property, the things that are meaningful to him, all his life's work, and then he has people coming in giving the old traditional answers, Job, well, you were evil and God punished you. That didn't work because he could see there are a lot of evil people doing quite well in the world. I mean, it just didn't fit. And that's in the Bible, wrestling with this problem, I think. And that comes right out of children raise that question very early. If one of their friends dies or one of their relatives, you can see it happening. Well, we're going to have to be wrapping up pretty soon. I don't know how much time we got. How much more time we got? 15 minutes? Oh, good. Yeah, we've got plenty of good time. So let's move on.
Well, I know we wanted to address the idea of self-denial. What do we mean by thinking, being aware of our own self-importance and not becoming overbearing to someone else or thinking that we have to be
some religions have taught. I think it's in Augustine, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to check again. That the biggest sin of human beings is self-love. But I think that's a mistake. And I think the Methodists, John Wesley, had a different view. And that's the view that if a person can't love himself or herself, he can't love another person. So, in other words, what's the love your neighbor as what?
As yourself.
As yourself, which presupposes you love yourself. So what the naturalist and humanist are saying, and a healthy religion, I would think, would say, loving yourself is essential to having healthy relationships with other people. In some ways, you could say a sociopath cannot love other people and cannot love himself. Because if you love yourself, you're going to have a loving relationship with other people. And I don't think a hardcore sociopath, it's like my going to Japan and hearing everybody speak Japanese, and I'm just out of it because I can't speak it. And I think a sociopath is simply not in the world of most people who have this normal capacity to share and to love and to receive love. And so a sociopath's life is basically treating other people as what? What would you think?
As objects.
As objects, yeah. Whereas a child learns that somewhere along the way, toys and persons are different. You can't just handle people. And so we have a phrase, don't toy with somebody. It means they have feelings and they have to be respected in a certain way. So coming of age is a major work project that has enormous pain and enormous joy at the same time. I think the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who developed the philosophy called hedonism, understood this, that you can have trivial pleasure and you can have profound pleasure. Profound pleasure includes, and that was a major point he was making, profound pleasure, long-term pleasure, intense, deep pleasure involves the pleasure of other people.
Excuse me, I've had enough water, I have to.
Yeah, Marianne's had allergy problems all day. Okay. And one thing we wanted to do is talk about, so if you don't mind, then I'll just go ahead and talk about how conscience does develop. If the language takes time to develop, do you remember as a kid, when you were trying to speak and your parents say, you don't say, I'm going to eat a egg, what did your parents say to you? I'm going to eat an egg. Now, that's a big leap for a kid. Most kids will start off not knowing the difference. Or you might say, me and Jimmy are going to the store. And you have to say, who's going to the store? Then they'll correct and say, well, it was Jimmy and I are going to the store. This takes time to learn a language. And so Mary and I are trying to suggest is morality is not something that's inborn. It's something that we have the capacity to develop and grow, but it has to be mostly given to us over the years by the community we live in and the people who are dear to us. And that's why it is so crucial for those relationships to develop.
You want to yeah.
If you're lucky, we'll get Jonas here with us, and maybe we can talk about, while we're talking about children, talk about Camp Quest and how you help develop conscience and thinking up there, Camp Quest.
Well, Joe, I think they come with a pretty good sense of conscience. They're
what age are these?
Oh, well, these are 8 through 17, and and by the time of 8,
they know what a conscience is. Most people do. Yeah. And so,
it would be the exceptional child who, as you said, well, a sociopath would be extreme, but then I suppose there are other conditions like some of the attention deficit disorders where they don't really have this sense of other people. It's something that takes a much longer time to learn.
The parents have to work, and others, and teachers. I'm amazed at some of the teachers, how patient they are with children, because even in a classroom, they can have enormous differences. I can remember my teacher taking me and saying, I'm going to show you a room you've never been in. And it was the library. And that dear teacher figured this out and introduced me to Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer and all these wonderful books that I didn't know existed. And what she did is she introduced morality in the books and the pleasure of reading things like that. And I just think, what a gift some of these teachers have. And neighbors sometimes can just somehow have an enormous impact. And that's what Mary and I have been trying to emphasize is what you're doing there in Camp Quest. You help these parents because conscience has to be informed. It takes information.
Yeah, you bring something to mind that I've been concerned about a long time. Our the fact that we move around so much now. When I was growing up, we had aunts and uncles around, and the aunts and uncles were very much concerned with the development of the child and their attitudes towards the parents and everything. I mean, as an individual, you don't want to say, well, really, I'm a good parent, But it's okay for an aunt or an uncle to say, hey, your father or your mother are very good parents.
And you need that.
And now, when we don't have that kind of family support around, we don't have this reinforcement of the attitudes towards the parents and so on.
So with all those aunts and uncles and relatives, there was no way you could grow up to be a criminal. And I know I had aunts and uncles. I mean, they were, and my grandmother. And if we had all our people in the audience here, they could talk about these relatives and neighbors and teachers who made it so they were not out of touch with the adult world. Even if you get mad at your parents, you still have some other adults you can relate to. And that's what I'm so happy about Camp Quest. My granddaughter, of course, as you know, went there. And it,
well, let me tell you, the people beyond that, where Camp Quest, the ideas originally came from, and it came from this guy right here. I remember at some point the people at Camp Quest were trying to compile a history of where it came from, and so much is associated with Edwin Kagan, who was the first director and organized everything. But then there were these other people who from the what is it, the something interest group of Cincinnati and in northern Ohio. Some of them were saying, "Oh no, it goes back to Joe Barnhart." And so I kind of checked with you, and I got the idea way back when in the 90s. You told me you were going around the country giving talks and talking about well, I mean, you come from the Baptist background, and you were talking about how the Baptists really did a lot of things for their kids, but the Freethought community was not doing this.
As a matter of fact, I just talked on the phone last night, and she's 92, I believe, to a woman who was my teacher in Sunday school, and we've kept in touch all those years. And I call her now and then because she's dear to me. And I watched her. She has developed in her thinking and her, she didn't stop at the age of 20 or 40 or 50. She continues, and she's a fascinating person. And I learned an enormous amount, part of which is she got me to stand up and speak. And I was shy, and she didn't make fun of me. And that means a lot to a kid.
Well, I guess you had a different view of Sunday school than I did.
Yeah, now that may be. Well, I had some, who were just out to indoctrinate. But see, but what I'm saying is, people, whatever their views are, sometimes people are human beings. I mean, even if they hold to views you and I wouldn't agree with, they can still be humanist in their ethics. And this dear woman is as much a humanist as any person I know, and I'm just grateful to her. In fact, I'm going to take her somewhere next week. We're going somewhere.
Oh.
So, how much more time do we got?
We about 15 seconds before we go to closing.
Okay. Well, can you do? It's about. It's time to start wrapping up.
Well, okay. It depends on how fast you talk, Joe. But we're glad to have spent this time with our audience here and remind them time to start wrapping up. And if you want to contact us during the week, get out your pencil and paper and write down this. You can contact us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail at 865-272-9060. And if you send your questions in, we'd be happy to respond to them. I guess one other thing is
Go ahead.
that send the questions to